LaTousha Daniels, President and CEO of the Miami Children's Initiative. Listen, we want to welcome you here every Thursday as we share information, as we are being relevant, being a resource, and being reliable to our residents and our constituents here in Liberty City. We're doing it right here on this social media platform on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, sharing with you information in and around and about Liberty City. We want to encourage you to join us as we do our live with MCI. Also, we do our in focus where we laser in focus on those people, constituents, and individuals who are doing work in and around Liberty City. We want to also invite you here to watch us as we highlight our early learning providers right here in our community. And last but not least, our coffee with the cop. Join us right here.
All right, in 5, 4. Well, greetings and welcome to In Focus with MCI. This is one of our versions and opportunities on this social media platform to share information, resources, and connections with those who are in political office, community activists, but more importantly, community servants. And so today, it is my distinct pleasure to bring into our MCI studio none other than the Honorable Carlos Martinez, Miami-Dade Public Defender. Carlos, how are you this great day?
I am doing great. How are you?
Fantastic. But I'd like to start off, first of all, by saying that our relationship, just personally, our relationship has spanned over the last several years. And for me to say that as an African American who was groomed and reared in Liberty City, to say that I have a relationship with the public defender who is Hispanic and is not from my community, I think is absolutely noteworthy. And for that, I want to tip my hat that you're not just someone who has a title, but you're someone who has the heart that goes behind the title. So I had to say that as my welcome, Carlos. But for those who don't know you, please tell us, Carlos, a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thank you again for the opportunity, and thank you for that great introduction. I do consider you a friend, and I consider myself not just a friend of Liberty City, of Overtown, and a lot of areas in this community where folks don't realize that the Public Defender Office, we actually represent people from all parts of this county. But I have a long history. I think we've mentioned before that one of my first jobs as a manager of Exxon gas stations, before I was even thinking about going to law school, was actually in 103rd Street and Northwest 7th Avenue.
We know that gas station quite well.
I used to run that gas station when that gas station was started out as a self-service gas station back in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
I was one of the first supervisors of the area. So I worked with a manager at that station, and I worked also with a manager on 27th Avenue and 135th Street. There was another Exxon there. And I also worked on Northwest 2nd Avenue and 183rd Street, yet another Exxon gas station.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm well aware, and I have worked in the community, whether it was in public service or even in private service with Exxon. All my work has been working with individuals.
So how did we move from managing an Exxon gas station to now managing the law office of Carlos Martinez, the public defender?
Well, it's kind of a long trajectory, so I'll try to be brief. And of course, I have 3 strikes against me. I'm Cuban American, I'm a lawyer, and I'm a politician because I'm an elected official.
Mm-hmm.
So we tend to be kind of long-winded. So I'll try to give the story
You,
as brief as I can.
but you forgot one P. That is,
What? Which one?
it's called the preacher who has the longest. Uh,
Well, I don't speak that long. Yeah. So this show, I think it's less than an hour, not 3 hours. So we're gonna be good. Um, but my history working for Exxon Company USA, I was working part time when I was in high school, and then I worked my way up where I was promoted to managing gas stations. By the time I was 18, I was already managing my first gas station, and then I kept going to Miami-Dade College at the same time that I was working full time. And finally, I graduated from Florida International University. And it was after that that I decided to go to law school. And I went to the University of Miami. I had the fortune of being late to class one day in law school when they were designating where we would work for the summer, where the law students in the honors program
mm-hmm.
work in the summer. Because I was late to class, because I there was an accident on my way to class, and I was the only witness that was not involved in the accident. Because I was late to class, the only assignment that was left was working in the public defender's office.
Is that right?
And even though when I went to law school, I thought, you know what? I've been with Exxon for 11 years. By the time I'm done, I'll probably go work with corporate at Exxon Company USA. And yet God intervened and I ended up in an internship in the public defender's office. And I loved every day of my internship to the point that when I applied and when I was hired, I got a $7,000 a year pay cut from
Wow.
what I was making at Exxon before law school. So I loved this work from day one, and I continue to love it now.
So you're bringing an interesting point to me as it relates to salary to those who work in your office. I think often when people think about lawyers, they think about big rollers. They think
Right.
about those who are bringing in heavy cash. But you're saying to us that coming into this office, it was actually a pay cut. So it was actually a calling for you to take up this work.
I felt it was a calling for me, frankly, from the moment where I interviewed my first client at the jail. I had a really deep connection, spiritual connection to my roots. My roots were in Little Havana at St. John Bosco Catholic Church. Both of my parents worked at the church, not volunteered. They actually got paid. My mom was the receptionist. My dad was the maintenance man at the church. And working in that church, which was one of the poorest in Miami-Dade County, I came across with some of the poorest folks in this community who were as poor and sometimes even more poor than we were. But poor, the definition of poor, it's a financial definition. It's not a spiritual definition.
Nor is it an emotional.
It's not. So when I decided to take the pay cut and start working here, it's because it was what I wanted to do with my law degree. And even though I went deep into debt getting a law degree, it still was what I wanted to do. And I do feel to this day that it is a calling.
And so, Carlos, it is absolutely a delight to know that someone who leads an office, who is a safeguard in the community as it relates to defending the voiceless or those who can't defend themselves, to me, it is a blessing to know that you're a man of faith and that your faith is anchored around and surrendered around family because your family was a part of that upbringing.
It's a big part of the upbringing.
And so, Carlos, let's get back to this because I know a little bit of something that some of the others don't know. Let's go back to Havana. Let's go back to this young man in Havana who comes over to eventually to the United States that had a little fear about that as well. You necessarily wanted to come. I don't want to tell your story.
Right?
But go back to that moment that you and I shared in a previous moment where you kind of innately stood up for something and it kind of pushed you to this place called public defending.
Yeah, when I was 9 years old and I was in Cuba, my parents had signed up to leave Cuba. Thanks to LBJ, there was something called the Freedom Flights. So
Mhm.
they had signed up for the Freedom Flights in 1965. So in 1967, my dad was actually sent to forced labor camps because they were expecting him to leave within 2 years. And for the male head of the household, they had to work out in agriculture in forced labor, which meant that I was at home with my other two siblings and my mom, and she was taking care of us. And my mom would always help me with my homework, and I would always talk to her about it. So one day I came home and I said to my mom, I was selected to be the speaker when they're having in Cuba, they would have a Bay of Pigs celebration.
Hey,
And you
tell us
may,
about the Bay of Pigs.
so the Bay of Pigs was essentially an invasion where exiles from the community who were trained by the CIA were thinking that they could actually go to Cuba, overthrow the Cuban government, and liberate Cuba.
Mhm.
So, as an exile, and even when we were in Cuba, my parents would tell me a certain history of what happened and what the yearning to be free was like. So, it was very strange and ironic that because I had done so well in school in all of the topics, except for one, there was one topic that another kid beat me out. But I had done so well that in the entire Havana province, they had selected one kid to be the narrator for the huge event at the Sports Palace in Havana with 5,000 kids present.
Wow.
There was one kid selected. That happened to be me. Now, nobody told me it was going to be 5,000 kids until after the fact, after everything happened. But I was selected. And so I went home with a script that I had been given of what I needed to memorize for narrating. They were doing a little play
Mhm.
on the stage, and I was going to be the narrator. So I took the script to my mom. I did not tell my mom that this what it was going to be. I just told her, "Oh, I got selected to be the narrator in a play." I didn't tell her what a huge thing it was. So she looks it over. She looks at it, and she says, "This isn't what happened." And because it was from the communist government perspective
Mhm.
of what had gone on, it actually was celebrating the so-called victory over the people who tried to invade. And they
Wow.
were saying all sorts of things about how terrible the people were who had invaded, who were trying to overthrow Castro.
And what
And
happened?
well, my mom fixed the script for me, and she said that's not really what happened. So she tells me what it is. So I memorize it like my mom tells me.
Right.
So when I go to the event, at the event, and mind you,
5,000 people. We got to set it up.
five,
5,000 children,
well, you
not
can
counting the
imagine,
adults.
I was a really small 9 year old, like a very short and skinny 9 year old.
Okay.
I walk up on the stage, I look out, and if you can imagine the biggest theater you can imagine, just rows and rows and rows of people. And the whole thing is lit up, and I can see all the kids. Thankfully, I don't get nervous or anything. I just walk up, and then, they dim the lights, and then they start the little play, and I start narrating. In the middle of my narration, the teacher and another adult walk up, and they literally put tape over my mouth. they lift me up because I was a little kid. They lift me up, they haul me off a stage, and they make me stand off a stage on the side. And that wasn't the humiliating part. The humiliating part is because all those kids had gone on school buses. All the buses had to go around this area, and all the kids were picked up in the same spot. They put me in the front spot so that every child who was getting on a bus and
Let's
every
see.
teacher was getting on a bus got to see me with my mouth taped. And it was infuriating. It was humiliating. I was completely confused. And of course, the worst part is I was afraid of what I had done to my parents' chance of leaving Cuba.
So let's fast forward to 2020. That 9-year old saw what it was like to stand up to speak truth to power. How did it impact and affects who I'm looking at today?
Well, it had a huge impact because even though as a trial attorney, I would fight in court for my client, fighting for a client is very different than fighting for yourself. I only decided to run for public defender when I had found my voice. And
Mm-hmm.
that's only 2007.
Understood.
So that tells you the impact that it can have on children when adults abuse children
And
and,
muzzle them
and
from their potential.
muzzle them from their potential. And that's driven me. And I did not realize how much it had impacted me until about 20 years ago in
Mhm.
having a discussion with my former boss. And, all of a sudden he starts tearing up. And I realized how much of an impact it had on me. And I had not even spoken about it until I was 40 years old about
Um,
what that meant to me and how that impacted me and the fear that I had that me speaking up would have kept my parents from leaving Cuba.
Amazing. So I have to remain true to my audience. And I want to throw some things out there and have a real conversation about it. We understand a little bit better who Carlos Martinez is and how he has become this public defender. But of course, in my community, often those who need attorneys, they can't afford them.
Right?
And so they find themselves in the care of a court appointed attorney.
Right?
And sometimes it has been said or rumored that those who look like me aren't often given the benefit of the doubt. And they say, oh, that's the public pretender's office. That's not the public defender's office. Talk to me about equity in your office, sensitivity and inclusion as it relates to serving Black and Brown individuals.
Well, you hit on a really important point. And the important point that you're making is how is it that we treat individuals? And how is it not only how we are portraying ourselves, but we are actually doing? And what I mean by that is, I don't care if you happen to be an attorney and you're telling me, oh, I'm client centered or I'm woke or, Black Lives Matter. You can say whatever you want. I want to see what work you're doing. So the difference between, what I do and how I carry myself, to me, it's not just words, it's actions that matter.
Mm-hmm.
So it's 100% correct for somebody to think that they are not being treated equitably. 100% correct, particularly an African American. Why? The system is completely stacked. When I get stopped by the police, I don't get the same treatment as an African American. I have never gotten the same treatment. How do I know that? My general counsel is African American. And when he has told me he has faced himself when he's dressed in a suit And when he's gotten stopped or he's gotten questioned, it's shocking. I've also had personal experience that I observed. I had an African American roommate in law school,
Mm-hmm.
and many in the community, if you go back a long way in our community, you're going to recognize this name right away. Dallas Manuel. He used to
Mm-hmm.
be a big personality on radio.
Mm-hmm.
Well, his son was my roommate,
Okay.
and his son opened my eyes. And this was in law school. This is 33 years ago when his son opened my eyes to the discrimination that happens every day. And it's the little things. It's not just the big things,
It's not the big
but
thing.
it's not the big things like just like an arrest or even a shooting. It goes all the way. And he told me that he would be followed in stores when he walked in, and it didn't matter what he was wearing. And I'm sorry. When he told me, I'm like, I think you're imagining stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So he and I went, we drove down to the falls. Okay, Dallas Manuel was always dressed impeccably.
Okay.
It's only been now that I'm in a nice suit. Okay? Just put it that way. But Dallas Manuel was always dressed impeccably. He always had very nice shorts on, nice polos on. He would actually wear appropriate footwear, not sandals like I was wearing. He would actually wash his t-shirts before he would ever be seen in a t-shirt.
Right.
So needless to say, I went like my old self, and he went impeccably dressed, and we went to the falls. And when we went to the first store, he said, "Don't walk in with me. Let me walk in and just observe the people around me." It was shocking to me
Wow.
how many people were looking at what he was doing, and they were keeping their distance, but it was obnoxious, and it was employees.
Yes.
So just having that experience really informed for me just a little inkling of what individuals could be facing in this community. And then having represented client after client after client, and they would tell me exactly what happened. And then when I would do the investigation, the information was true. When I would do the deposition, some officers would even admit to what they had done. So over and over, that informs who I am. That informs what I expect of my attorneys and what I tell my attorneys. And we've had implicit bias training in my office.
And that's important.
But it is not the only thing. You got to do more than just doing implicit bias training. You have got to look, and I look to see how quickly are you interviewing the client. Is there a difference on how quickly you interview the client based on race? I'm not saying that it's intentional. I'm saying that it could be that you don't even know. It could be unconscious bias that you are substituting some things for race. For example, I know because I lived through it as an attorney in Miami-Dade County in the 90s. In the 90s, there were so many drug sting operations being held in Overtown, in Liberty City, in Brownsville, all over town. Every week they would arrest 80 people. So what happened? A lot of people have criminal histories dating back to the 90s, even though they haven't done anything else. They haven't been arrested for anything else. But what happens now? When one of those individuals gets arrested, even on a misdemeanor, they have that history.
They have the history.
They have that history. So sometimes people can look and can substitute the prior criminal history with race. So because the Black community was targeted, there's no question about it. It was targeted in the 90s.
And so, Carlos, so your steps in moving forward, because someone may be watching us and saying, I don't understand or even know what an implicit bias is. But those are those things that you don't see blatantly, but we make choices. As you use the example that when the African-American young man walked into the store, there was an automatic assumption to watch him because he may steal. Right? It was an automatic assumption that when your general counsel, when he's pulled over, that he's already a threat, that he's already someone who could potentially run. And so things become more tense. And so, how have you postured and positioned your office to ensure that when our Black and brown babies and even adults are sitting before your attorneys, what are some real practices outside of training that you're saying that you're doing that we can document and we can say to the community they can hold your office accountable and responsible for?
So I have my supervisors on a regular basis looking at what work is getting done on cases. So, for example,
But talking about cases, we know that in Miami-Dade County, it can be kind of stacked. And sometimes people they just kind of do enough, right?
Well, doing just enough is not good enough for me.
Okay.
So my training of and my expectations of the supervisors that I selected, every single supervisor I have selected, every single one I've selected, I have trained them myself. This is the data that you look at. These are the red flags for what you're going to be seeing. And when you see red flags, look at the race. Look at the race. Don't just look at, oh, this attorney, for example, let's say an attorney has 100 cases and the attorney has taken 50 depositions on 50 cases, let's say. Depositions have been taken on 50 cases. When you look at the other 50, I want you to look at it and tell me the race.
So you're making race a real consideration in your office.
A conscious look at what is happening on cases.
Would you say that that's happening around the country?
In some areas around the country, they are doing that. In most areas, they're doing the basic implicit bias training without really going deeper into how do you supervise your staff? How do you look at what things are done? The other thing I do that I did pre-COVID is I was in contact with a lot of pastors. I was in contact with community groups, with the NAACP, with Black Associations.
Black Lawyers Association.
So that if there's any complaint, bring it to me. I'll look into it. And you personally know that if there's a complaint from the community about one of my attorneys that is not being responsive to a client, that information can get to me immediately.
Carlos, let's stop right there. So where can I call and how do I contact? So I'm just calling your office. Is there a special office that is set aside if I am not pleased with my attorney?
So if you're not pleased with your attorney, what I need you to do is send me an email at info@pdmiami.com.
Info at Public Defender. So it's info at
pdmiami.com.
Okay.
And what you say in the email, the subject line, just say, please refer to Carlos Martinez, and they'll get it to me.
Got it.
That's a monitored email. The reason I'm not encouraging phone calls, we received 238,000 phone calls last year.
Got it.
I cannot handle phone calls. I mean, it's just not possible with the number of staff that I have to handle phone calls. But I will take the email. There are also a lot of community folks that have my information, and they know how to get a hold of me either through info@ or some folks have text, or some folks also know Sofia Montenegro, who's my community liaison, and she will also get a hold of me. So
you've made race a conscious and identified factor in your office.
Yes.
That when they're weighing cases. Number two, you've provided supervisors to monitor caseloads to ensure that you have handpicked, that you have hand trained to ensure that there is equity and there is accountability and response to those individuals that have been assigned. But in addition to that, you're saying to us that if in this community, if they are not pleased, they're not getting response, that they have open access to you, Carlos J. Martinez, by simply sending you an email at info@pdmiami.com, that
Correct.
then they would have a response. So that's how we can hold you accountable and responsible.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you a few other things. In the wake of George Floyd and all of the individuals who have died in the hands of or in police custody, what are some matters or ways that you are addressing safety measures for those who are being arrested or under the care of maybe Miami-Dade PD or anyone in Miami-Dade County? What are some efforts that are the public defenders is doing? Our office is doing.
So in Miami-Dade County, when somebody gets arrested and they're booked, we have no mechanism to monitor the police because we only get involved if somebody gets arrested.
Okay.
So if somebody gets arrested and they are booked into the Miami-Dade County, one of the jails, we monitor the jails on a regular basis. A few years back, I designated one of my staff people to be the jail monitor and the jail liaison. So if there's any complaint by any inmate about whether it's medical, whether it's safety, that information gets to her from the attorney. Clients can call my office. I mentioned to you that we had 238,000 phone calls. Those are only the in custody phone calls.
Wow.
So at any point in time, there are only 2,400 individuals in the jail. So what that tells you is we get repeated phone calls from clients at the jail. We get the information. If there's an issue, we've had situations where somebody's suicidal. We have our own protocols that we work with the jail. Once something happens, we immediately contact the jail, have somebody view that person, have medical staff. So just to make sure that it's real. And if it's a real issue, then they have mental health staff that can work with that individual.
Okay.
On top of that, our attorneys, about 10 years ago, I set it up when we had the last budget crisis. I set it up where we have video connection in every single jail cell so that an individual we can contact our clients at the jail in a secure room. It's a private communication. It is not monitored, and it's point-to-point video.
So if something is happening to them, they can share that confidentially.
Well, there are different ways they can share the information. Something's happening, they can call my office. Another way that's happened in the past where we've got information is where they tell a counselor at the jail, and that counselor gets the information to my liaison or to somebody in my office. And on top of that, the attorneys are on regular communication with clients at the jail through video interviewing. So we've had situations where you're interviewing client one, and client one tells us about something that's happening to inmate three. Mm-hmm. And we'll get that information. And if it's one of our clients, we'll follow up on it. So there are multiple mechanisms for us to find out to what extent we need to intervene.
So in these last few minutes, as we wrap up, I've got 3 pressing questions that I want to ask you. Because a lot of crimes are happening in COVID context, especially with youth, over the internet. They are bullying each other. They are making threats. They are doing inappropriate things. And you mentioned earlier that more specifically in the African American community, that many of their offenses follow them a lot further, and it's hard, and they're heavierly, they're more stringently or more firmly I guess, given cases, I don't know how to use the proper word there, but that their cases or their charges is what I'm trying to say,
Yeah.
are stronger charges than the average. What are some warnings and some methods that we have to protect our youth that we can, or measures that you have to help our youth? What also are additional services that maybe our viewing audience may not know of that the public defender office offers, i.e., seal and expungement,
Yeah.
all those kind of things? And then your parting words. So 3 questions in one.
Okay. So I will try to cover all of them. So the first one, in terms particularly of what happens on social media,
Mhm.
what all these threats are, and that kind of stuff. I would have hated if an adult had said what I'm about to tell parents right now. Okay, when I was younger, I would have hated some adult to say what I'm going to say. Monitor what your kids are doing. You have to monitor to protect your children. You got to monitor what they're doing on their laptops, on their computers, on their phones, because making the social media threats or cyber threats, it's a second degree felony. It's one of the charges that, particularly if you're making a threat, calling in, a bomb threat, or, as a joke. I did a lot of pranks when I was, back then it was called junior high. It wasn't called middle school.
Mhm.
But back then, when I was in junior high, oh my God, if I was in junior high, in middle school right now, I would never be able to be an elected official
Understood.
because I did so many pranks that are now considered serious crimes. And
Right. So
one of
putting your hand or threatening a teacher or saying something could potentially get you a felony charge.
pulling a fire alarm, for crying out loud, pulling a fire alarm, those kinds of things are considered so serious because of the situation that we live in right now, where there are shootings in schools, where all of this craziness is happening. So please monitor what your children are doing, on cyberspace, whether it's on the laptop, computer, or
On
their
their
phone.
phones,
Keep
because you're
track
saying
of
it
what
will follow them.
it will follow them for life. Because a lot of these cases, you may be able to beat the rap, but it'll still be on your record.
Wow.
So please take care of your children in that way. One thing we are doing to help the parents understand those things, we have a program called Play It Smart. So if anybody wants to go visit our website, go to pdmiami.com and look at Play It Smart. Play It Smart is a program, interactive program that we do with schools, with churches, with civic groups, where we teach kids and their parents on how to interact with the police.
If they're
And
pulled over, if they
right,
interact, yes.
right. And so that way the child or the young person can be safe, and the officer can also feel safe. Because if
Mhm.
the officers feel safe, it's less likely to have a confrontation that results in something horrible, at least in Miami-Dade County. I know it's very worse. It's worse in other parts of the country. So
And so
that's great.
there's a video that I'm going to show at the end of this that talks about just get home, but it
Exactly.
plays to the fact of what you have on your website about playing it
Absolutely.
smart.
Absolutely. And we are working with Miami-Dade County Public Schools to actually have lesson plans where it's all our Play It Smart. So that way, it's a school environment. It's acted by the drama program at one of the local schools. And I recently viewed, the video before the edits. And
Okay.
the program's going to be great. But another program that we do is similar to that, which is the consequences aren't minor. And what we
Mm.
do is we educate young people and their parents on the consequences of an arrest and what are the typical arrests. What are the things you can do to avoid even being the focus of the police. So stay away from certain types of behaviors. That's consequences aren't minor. And the last one you mentioned, it's our redemption project, which I started back in 1998 with Wayne Rollins, and back then, we had Frederica Wilson helping out, Kendrick Meek helping out. So way back when in 1998, we created that program to assist individuals who were sealing and expungement. So if somebody wants to seal and expunge, they can actually send us an email again to info@pdmiami.com. And in the subject line, just put seal and expunge information.
Mm-hmm.
And Sophia will get that information and communicate with them.
Amazing.
The last one I want to mention is Amendment 4. Amendment 4 is rights restoration for people who have been convicted of felonies. With Amendment 4, we can also assist individuals by looking at their record to see if they qualify for a process that we have in Miami using the state statute to help them have their voting rights restored.
So, Carlos, this is absolutely, an hour has flown by, but I thank you for your time. I hope our viewing audience has a better perspective and view, and who is the man behind the title of public defender. Carlos, I thank you for being a friend to our city, being a friend to our families, and being a friend to me. But more importantly, we thank you for keeping the mission of your office sure, that you will speak for, defend those who cannot afford an attorney. And I'm happy to hear that you're going to ensure that they get the best when they're in your care, because our community needs to hear this. I'm going to allow you to say our parting words. Is there any final words you'd like to share with our viewing audience before we close?
Sure. Yeah, I've said this many a times. It's an honor for me to
shift your camera just a little bit, because this COVID world. There we go. There you're back. You're back. Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's an honor for me to serve as the public defender. It is my life's calling. It's added meaning to my life to be able to breathe life into what were really constitutional principles. But when in fact I can use my law degree, I can guide 200 attorneys in my office to assist individuals throughout this community so that not only do they get quality representation, but my hope is that the experience improves their lot in life, either with us winning their case outright or being able to set up a process where they can get whatever help they need going forward, and also making sure that we change a lot of the laws we need to change. And I want to make sure that I continue fighting for those. And thank you so much for the opportunity and for being a partner for me in this journey to be able to do the work that I do. I cannot do it by myself. It takes every single one of my employees, and it takes people such as yourself to be doing the work that you're doing in the community, particularly with our young ones, so that I never have to represent them. That to me is the best success. If their children are succeeding in school, if they're succeeding in the communities, if they're actually, sprouting in the community, seeds of hope, to me, that is the best legacy I could leave if, in fact, I reduce the number of clients that I have by the time I leave.
Carlos, we again thank you for having and making time for us. And to our viewing audience, thank you for joining us for In Focus with MCI. It's been our pleasure, and have a great day.